Hi everyone, welcome back to Stephan podcast, brought to you by Bold. That's over at getbold.io. That is for American listeners who want to buy Bitcoin. Now, getting into it today, my guest is a NIM called OpnState, and we're going to be getting into a range of things. But first off, welcome to the show, and maybe give us a little bit of a background on yourself. Obviously, whatever you're comfortable to share.
Thanks, Stephan. Thank you for allowing me to speak to your audience. I'm a policy and legislation advisor at one of the top 10 global financial centers in the world. Before that, I was a banker for about 14 years. I managed commercial accounts for large companies who had over $1 million in lending. So I've been kind of a student of, the financial markets for a long time. And working for a bank, sadly for me, I had standards and values that I wanted to abide by. So I got disillusioned by the job that I was doing while working at this big bank. I quickly saw the misaligned incentive structures that exist in those big banks. It's all about money, money, money. It's not really about improving the economy. I quickly saw the corruption in the 2008 financial crash and the bailouts that came after that. I got disillusioned. I wanted to make a difference. At that point, I also had children, and I didn't want to facilitate the kind of world that I was seeing working in this big bank. So I asked myself, what can I do to make a difference in the world? And then I saw a job ad in a government for a policy role. And I said, sure, I'll just apply for that. And I don't know how, but I got it. The first thing that happened when I joined, of course, was they asked me, do you know what the FATF is? That was literally the first thing that they asked. And I had no idea at the time. And I think everybody needs to know what the FATF is. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we talk today. So I've been in this position for about 5 or 6 years. And throughout those 5 or 6 years, all I've been doing essentially is legislation which facilitates and propagates the Compliance AML framework in my country. That means, when you go to a bank and they ask you for ID, right? All the way to when you receive a wire transfer and it gets held and they ask for source of funds, all of those things. Those are the things that people see. There are lots of things that people don't see and don't realize that are happening.
Yeah, important for people to understand that. Yeah, I think you're right. I think just to explain a little bit as well, I think people have this interaction with, let's say, the fiat system, with fiat banking, and maybe that teller at the bank, the front line of the bank is saying, hey, what's your source of funds, or this, that, and the other, or they're filling out a form online, or they get an email from the compliance department, and they're sort of like, why are these banks making my life so difficult? I just want to set up an account, or I want to do a transfer. Why are they making it so difficult? And part of that reason is compliance. And then it's like, what's the underlying reason for that? Well, because somewhere, a lawmaker or a regulator in that country said, hey, you need to do this AML or this sanctions compliance, and then kind of above that is sort of FATF, Financial Action Task Force, kind of pushing a lot of these things. And so I think that's kind of people sometimes when they blame banking officers, it's almost like they're shooting the messenger, isn't it?
What my role has allowed me to see is how deep the rabbit hole really goes. And there's a lot more than just a teller at the bank asking you a couple questions. I actually have been, like I told you, drafting legislation. I've probably been responsible for drafting about 18 pieces of legislation in my 5 years. And that's from beginning to end. So I was project lead. And my role essentially is to implement global standards. And what I've realized through this, which is the worst part of it, it's not that there's compliance requirements at the bank. The worst part is that governments are losing sovereignty to global standard setting bodies. That's the really alarming thing. We can get into that a bit later. So in my 5 years in my current role, I wanted to make a difference. And I left banking to make the world a better place. And my 5 years in my current role, basically, I've just been in another cog in some deeply corrupt, disgusting, freedom-eroding infrastructure. And eventually I've just had enough. I had enough. And so I want to kind of address why I'm wearing this mask. I really don't want to wear masks. I mean, COVID was enough for me. It's not pleasurable. But unfortunately, I got to Bitcoin too late in life with too little money. And so I still depend on my role. And there's also kind of a dictum that I'm not a superhero or anything like that, but the dimmest candle shines brightest in the darkest room. And so I see myself as having a crucial role where I am doing what I'm doing, those around me who really are really not, red pilled whatsoever, or orange pilled, or any kind of pill. And so I see, yes, I'm doing something that kind of disgusts me. And my outlet for that is this kind of anonymous identity that I've created. It allows me to speak up. It allows me to say what I'm seeing. It allows me to speak up without holding back. And that's what I plan on doing today.
Yeah, great.
So,
and as listeners know, I've long been critical of AML laws, sanctions laws, the FATF, all of these things, because from a strictly libertarian private property rights perspective, it impedes on private businesses being able to conduct their business. And so in practice, what we end up seeing is this kind of regulatory capture. We see this kind of government control, and even on their own terms, right? I've hosted people in the past, people like Ron Paul, P-O-L, who has spoken about how ineffective these AML laws have even been. Now, some people would know these laws as BSA, Bank Secrecy Act in the US, but I think kind of colloquially, I've heard people say, AML, sanctions, FATF, and so on. Okay, that said, let me ask you this way. The normal person on the street who, if you spoke to them, they might think, well, hang on, don't we need some of these laws to stop the criminals, to stop the drug laundering, whatever, money laundering, drug terrorists, whatever? Don't we need it? Don't we need these laws?
I would say that countries do need laws to catch criminals. I think that's one of the fundamental functions of a government. If there is to be a government, it has to provide a strong foundation for the effective operation of markets, right, and trade. And so you have to make sure that there's a way that people can transact, a way that's safe, and you need to make sure that people can walk on the streets without being assaulted and kidnapped and robbed. I'm not 100% libertarian. I do believe there's some kind of basic value to government, not in its current form, but in a different form. And I think that making sure that criminals are caught is one of those functions. Now, that being said, do you have to whip every single citizen into submission? Do you have to remove every single citizen's right to privacy and to transact in a free manner, sovereign manner, in order to catch criminals? No. And what's happening is that the regulations and requirements that you're seeing, they might piss off some of your viewers. But if only they knew what was under there, if they knew the information that's being shared freely, automatically, without due process, without a warrant, if only they knew what was happening behind the scenes, right? I think they would be a little bit more skeptical of the way things are being done right now.
Yeah. And so let's just click into that a little bit in terms of exactly what information is being shared with who. Are we talking about, let's say, law enforcement of a particular country going to the banking, let's say a banking company saying, hey, we know person ABC has an account with you, give us all his transactions. Is that the kind of thing the kind of information sharing that goes on?
Well, countries have different information sharing systems. So, for example, a country might have a tax information sharing.
Right, FATCA, CRS, these kinds of things. Yeah.
Right. And, I can speak to kind of some of the countries that I've seen. Yes, a government or another tax information authority can request any information on anybody, quite literally. So a jurisdiction will have provisions in their laws saying that if a tax information authority comes and says, we want to know every single account and every single transaction, where, does this person, how much do they spend on booze? Where have they gone lately, right? All of the details of the transactions, that can be provided under the tax information sharing provisions, right? And it's done in the background without people actually knowing that it's happening. And then the worst part is it's not just being shared with local police, it's being shared with foreign governments. How fair is that? How is that justified in terms of, what the value that it provides to society? So maybe it allows a government to collect a little bit more taxes, know a little bit more about their government, but figures that I've seen, and there's very little research being done on this, but the figures that I've seen is that the actual tax benefits are minuscule. They're not that big. So the sharing of information, and if I put my conspiracy hat on, I think is more about knowing everything about, or having perfect information on a society and on its citizens and how they transact and how they think, and building vast databases of information. I think it's more about that than it is about getting slightly more tax revenue for a jurisdiction.
And so I guess my question at that point, I'm curious, do you believe, as I said, I'm against these laws in principle, but hypothetically, do you believe it actually makes people more safe or not?
Well, I don't know. I know a lot of people, and I came to you because you interviewed Ron Paul, and because you interviewed Simon Lieveld. I can't pronounce it.
Lieveld, yeah, from the Netherlands, yeah.
Right. So, and you've written in Bitcoin Magazine about the FATF. So the answer I don't know is I don't know. So even though Ron Paul said, RONPOL, said that there was very little concrete measured effectiveness of these kind of regulations, just put it this way. If there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of people breaking into homes in a neighborhood, right? So these people come in with a van, they break into a house, take all the valuables, leave in a neighborhood, and it's happening regularly, right? If you just you put a police car on one of the corners in that neighborhood, and you just leave the lights on, and you literally have nobody in the car, right? Just for the fact of having a police car in that neighborhood, crime is likely to reduce. They're just going to go to a different neighborhood.
The deterrence effect.
Right, and there's no way to measure the tangible. Well, there is a way, but it's difficult, right? And so when you put these laws in place, does it deter criminals from laundering money? Maybe. I really don't know. But the fact is I don't care. I don't think society should have to forego their freedoms and their human rights in order to catch a very small fraction of a society. What harm, the harm that they do, those criminals, I think those risks and harms could be dealt with in different ways. Adequately funding the police, giving them the required tools, the required expertise. There are other ways to pursue criminals, and it's not by removing the rights and freedoms of every citizen.
Right. And I think this comes to an interesting point, and I believe you had this in one of the papers or in a talk you gave, where, let's say, in the quote-unquote Western world, the so-called free world, we believe in this idea of innocent until proven guilty. And it seems to me that FATF, AML laws, sanctions laws, they flip this whole concept on its head. And now we're all guilty until proven innocent.
Well, that's exactly right. Yes, I did. That was my speech that I gave at the Adopting Bitcoin. Now, when you go to a bank and you receive a wire transfer and they hold your money, I know of many people. It happened to me. When you receive a certain amount of money, the bank will ask you, well, what's the source of funds, right? They will hold the funds until you provide them the information they want. Personally, I'm building a house, and the bank wanted my house plans, quite literally. Wanted the contract with my builder, like everything. Is that warranted? I don't think so. It's annoying, and it's unjust, and it's quite literally is something that I really don't think is justified. So when you look at the presumption of guilt, right, a bank holding your money means they presume that money is the proceeds of a crime. There's some level of presumption of guilt around you and your money, and that applies to every single client of that bank. So that bank presumes that every single one of their clients is a money launderer. And that presumption of guilt is applied broadly without any kind of justification whatsoever. It's not about an algorithm, some big massive AI in the background choosing who they're going to hold funds for and who they're not. No. It's done automatically, broadly, regardless of who you are. You've been a loyal client. You've been completely honest with them for 30, 40 years. Your funds are going to be held. Doesn't matter. And so this presumption of guilt applies as well to sanction. And most importantly, it's not just the presumption of guilt. It's the erosion of due process. Now, our ancestors have fought for hundreds of years against oppression, going all the way back to the Magna Carta. Right? When certain individuals, lords, wanted to kind of erode the power of the king, right? Who was taking advantage of his power. So our ancestors have literally fought wars and died in order for us to have due process. Due process it means that in order for some kind of authority to erode your rights or to possess something that belongs to you, they need to go through steps. Those steps are there for our protection, to make sure that the government does what it's supposed to do only when it's supposed to do it. That's what due process does. And it limits what a government can do, right? That ability of a bank to freeze your funds, just like that, that's really scary to me. But sanction regimes are even worse. Governments around the world have lists of individuals who they want to deny from participating in society. Now, if your name is on one of those lists, you can be Tulsi Gabbard and have yourself removed, but not everybody has her kind of pull. Once your name is put on a list like that, you can't have accounts, your assets are frozen, maybe possessed, you can't travel, you're limited in how you can function in society without having been found guilty in a court. Now, to me, this is an absolute... If you don't mind, I'd like to go in a little rant. It's a brand new rant.
Sure, go for it.
The cypherpunks saw what was happening in the financial markets, right? They saw the government printing money to go to wars. They saw the bailouts in 2008, 2009. They wanted to create a system that fought back against that, right? We went as cypherpunks, if you consider one to be, if you consider yourself to be one, we went from being rebel cypherpunks who fought back against unjust oppression, that took risks to preserve our freedom and human rights. And now we've all become beta males whose goal is just to comply. And compliance has truly it's a virus that's taken over society. You work for companies. Every single one of the companies that you work for has a compliance officer. Every single one of them. And this compliance officer has taken training, courses, certifications. That compliance officer is essentially brainwashed into being compliant. And they're present in every single financial services business to keep the operations of that business in line, right? We've been molested by regulators. We've been raped by fines. We've been betrayed by the legal and judicial system. We've been subjugated by a false king that's called compliance, a king that promises riches, but only to the slaves that bend over and do what the king says should be done. What kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to give a society to our children? You have kids, Stephan. Do you want your kids to grow up thinking they have to be compliant, that they can't question, that they can't fight back, that they have no rights, that they have no privacy? This is absolutely something that I can't tolerate, and that's why I'm speaking up today. I'm risking my job coming on here.
And I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of it's a difficult thing to explain some of these problems because people have low patience to sort of understand kind of the layers of how this works. Okay, there's this AML laws, there's these sanctions laws, there's kind of the FATF that's kind of pushing this down, and I think there's all of these components of it. And to your point about compliance officers and what drives a lot of that is banks are not allowed to operate just freely. It's not a free market for banks, obviously, right? You need to be licensed. And the way these banks operate, it's basically life and death for a bank, right? If their banking license is cut, sayonara, goodbye. You don't have a business and you're not allowed to operate. Now, of course, there's Bitcoin, and so people can use Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is, at least today, it's sort of more appropriately thought of like a settlement layer, and it's not necessarily the low value peer-to-peer layer. Now, okay, fees are low today, but over time it's going to rise. And so I think that's where some of the challenge comes, because as I'm sure you're well aware, banks in most of the developed world are very much reliant on maintaining that, good standing compliance-wise, because otherwise they'll be cut off, right?
That's exactly right. And the worst part is that people have no say in what regulations the bank have to follow. And that goes to my earlier point about the loss of sovereignty by jurisdictions. So when I was asked to implement Financial Action Task Force requirements and standards, That's what I was asked. I was like, well, all right, here you go, OpnState. Implement this standard by the FATF. Now, the FATF is a global body. It meets in Paris. It has these plenaries, right? Over 200 countries. I know that's more than the amount of countries in the world, but people can listen to Ron Paul, your episode. It's great. It explains that further. 200 countries have committed to implementing the Financial Action Task Force standards. Now, only 40 countries have any direct say in what the standards actually say, what is in the standards. So imagine a country, the vast majority of countries around the world don't even have the opportunity to say, hey, we want this to be in the standards. They have no voice. They're granted the amazing boon of being able to observe plenary meetings. They can go and observe. That's literally all they can do. Now, if you look at a centralized standard-setting body like the FATF that only grants a voice to 40 countries, and believe me, only about 10 of those countries actually have any kind of material voice. So you have 10 countries around the world determining standards that are applied globally. Now, think about yourself, right? Think about the average resident. They can't go to their elected official and say, well, I don't like this regulation that the banks have to comply with. I want it changed. That elected official has zero ability, zero impact, zero voice on what is in the global standards. Quite literally, because most of the countries don't even have a say in what is in the FATF standards. Now, yes, the FATF is benevolent, and the FATF sends questionnaires to member countries to say, well, what do you think should be in there? Those questionnaires, though, they're not really about caring about the member's opinion. I'll give you an example. The FATF right now is focused on self-hosted wallets. This is a huge issue, and it's coming. We don't see it yet, but it's coming. Unhosted wallets is like you using your ledger and whatever wallet you use that is self-hosted to send money to somebody else without using an exchange. Right? That's what a self-hosted wallet allows you to do. Well, the FATF, the standards in there don't address self-hosted wallets. I've seen the Bitcoin community and the crypto community at large kind of rave about how this is wonderful. It gives them opportunities to do things, etc. They don't have to be licensed if they're just a Trezor or a ledger. That being said, it's coming. Now, this is how the FATF operates, right? It'll send a questionnaire to a country that isn't one of the top 10 or top 40 countries. So a country that doesn't have any kind of say, it'll send a questionnaire. It'll say, well, we've identified self-hosted wallets as an area of potential risk. Is your country addressing those risks? Now, this is an actual question that I saw in a questionnaire that was sent to my country. Now, what the FATF is actually doing here is it's saying, you better address the issue of self-hosted wallets, and if you answer saying that you're not addressing it, that will appear negatively on your ratings. And so it's not an official requirement for countries to regulate unhosted wallets, but countries can read between the lines. They know it's coming, and they'll start putting forward requirements for unhosted wallets. So somebody I know tried to transfer money from Revolut to an unhosted wallet. Well, now Revolut won't allow you to send to wallets that are outside of a certain list. Ledger and Trezor are in there. So are other software wallets, but it's a very limited list. You can't just send it to your Bitcoin node. You can't just send it to, your program, your wallet program that you coded yourself. It's not in the list. So already we're starting to see this happen. And believe me, from what I'm seeing from the inside, the crypto community at large and Bitcoin community will not be spared and will be slowly enveloped in this TradFi web of control. Now, it hasn't happened fully, but it will. And things like this take time.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the Coldcard Mark IV and the new Coldcard Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold Vault. The Bold Vault is a 2 or 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bold holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Cold Card hardware wallets to spin up a Bold Vault in just a few minutes, and the Bold Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bold today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbold.io. And now, back to the show. And so, as I understand, what you're referring to there is could be called the travel rule, right? That's kind of one of the things that the FATF is sort of pushing, this idea that if you're an exchange or a VASP, I think is the term people have been using, that you have to kind of certify or at least self-certify that, yes, this is my address that I'm withdrawing to, and slowly over time, it's like they're slowly, they're kind of choking down companies that want to interact with Bitcoin. And as you said, it's kind of like this, it's a questionnaire, but then also there's kind of this gray zone of what you're allowed to answer and what will look good and what will look bad. And over time, they sort of leverage, as I understand, this pressure aspect, right? Like, as an example, the FATF will put a country on the gray list or the black list. And then once you're on there, it's like, oh, you need to do more AML and do more sanctions compliance. Otherwise, you're not going to get off that list. And then now other companies or other countries, banks will not be able to send to you, right? Is that loosely what's going on? At least that's my understanding of it, right?
That's exactly it. I was in El Salvador recently, and you look at a country like El Salvador. Now, it's just recently liberated itself from all those gang members, right? And now it's able to open itself to the world. It's beautiful to see. I absolutely love that country. I also look at a president like Bukele. Now, Bukele has 2 choices, right? On the one hand, he wants to attract foreign investment. He wants Google and Elon Musk and whatever other company to go to El Salvador and spend billions of dollars doing whatever it is those companies do and invest those funds in
set up offices, do business there, etc.
Those companies won't invest a single dime if a country's placed on a kind of a negative list by the FATF or any other organization like the OECD or whatnot. So Bukele has a choice. He can say, well, the Financial Action Task Force, in its wisdom, has all these requirements that say that we have to implement this. We can either comply or not comply. If we comply, we're going to get a really good rating, which will attract foreign investment. These big companies will be able to send money to the country. This is great jobs. Jobs are going to multiply. It's wonderful. It's a golden road of prosperity that kind of lies in front of you if you comply. If you don't comply, you're put on the list and your correspondent banking relationships are shut off. They're limited. Rates go up. The ability for your citizens to send money overseas is limited. It's not a good place to be when you're on one of those lists. It's exactly the same as a citizen being on a sanctions list, except for governments, right? So your ability to transact and operate in the world is severely curtailed. So when you look at El Salvador and Bukele, which choice do you think he's going to take? He's going to comply. I've looked at the ratings by the FATF, the CFATF for El Salvador, right? And by looking at those ratings, you can see exactly what kind of laws the country is going to pass in the next 6 months, because those countries are incentivized to comply to standards that they have no input in. I'll give you another example, and I'm sorry if I'm kind of diverting, but there's certain things I want to kind of let out of my chest, right? When I was implementing the standards by the FATF, I had to create definitions in the legislation. Now, for any coders out there, a definition is like you're setting the variable, right? You're saying that this variable, this kind of container, will contain this kind of information, right? And those variables in the code kind of they interact with each other. They interact with the code, and at the end, they contain the information that you want them to contain. Well, in law, a definition is the most important aspect of a law because it defines who is in and outside of scope of that law. So who is subject to the requirements of that law? That's what definitions do. It's really, really important. So when I was creating definitions for the laws that I was working on, right, I looked at what the FATF said, because I was told to implement the FATF standards. Now, the FATF, in its wisdom, does not define a lot of terms. It leaves that up to the countries. But the countries have to implement the standards exactly to the letter. So what they do is once one country puts a definition that implements a standard, and then it gets rated positively, all other countries will adapt that definition for a term, right? Because countries know it passed the FATF rating. So, my country wanted to do the same thing. We wanted to get a good rating. I couldn't change the definition by a single iota. If I changed where a comma was located in there, right? If I just changed one word, here's what would happen to my country. The FATF, in its rating process, when one country rates another country, they would look at the change of the definition and say, well, why did you change that definition? What is it that you wanted to achieve by changing that one particular word in the definition? Because you know that these other definitions are accepted. This one isn't accepted yet. Why did you change that word? An entire process would then take place for my country to justify the change in the definition. It's a huge, painstaking process to be able to change the definitions in my country's laws. My country is supposed to be sovereign. My country is supposed to be able to define terms and to put people or businesses in and out of scope as it sees fit. That's a country's sovereignty. It's completely gone. Countries now have to implement definitions exactly to the letter. And so when I was creating those definitions, I was told to get a high rating, and I knew that if I changed anything, the ban hammer would come and hit us hard. So
right, we
just did exactly the same definitions. That's what's happening to countries. They're losing the ability to legislate. Now, they can legislate for things that aren't important. They can legislate, how the traffic laws work. It doesn't matter. But anything that has any kind of global, international significance is subject to a global standard of some kind. You look at the OECD, you look at the OMF, the IMF, look at all of the global standard-setting organizations creating global standards that countries have to implement or face the consequences. It's a huge web of control, and it's a centralization of policymaking, and that removes your ability as a citizen to have any kind of say, and it also removes accountability by those central bodies to the people who are actually impacted by those laws.
Right. So in some cases, it's almost like people inside some nation states or regulators can even just put their hands up and say, oh, look, I can't actually do anything. Look, it's this other entity outside of us. Therefore, shut up and take it, you little plebs, right? Like that's one way. And then the other way, the genuine people who actually want to fight it back, they actually have less power to do so because of this, right?
And believe me, people in government are happy with that. Because as a society, we've lost the ability to be responsible for our own actions. And this applies on an individual level. We want big government to be there to protect us, to keep us safe. And I'm not talking about the small percentage of people who want freedom. I'm talking about the vast majority of people who just want to go about their lives and not have to worry, not have to spend any kind of mental energy on trying to be self-sovereign and to be responsible for their own actions. It's a lot easier to say, well, look, there's a set of standards here and it seems to work and people who implement them don't get in trouble. Let's just do that. It's the easy way out. It's simple. It's attractive to jurisdictions. And believe me, when you have civil servants in a jurisdiction doing any kind of policy, they're going to look at the global standards first because they know if they implement those, there won't be any issues. That is lazy, it's wrong, and it erodes countries' sovereignty. This is a huge problem. And I know most of the people around the world just won't care. It doesn't matter. Let there be a global standard setting body deciding everything that countries do. Let countries just be kind of little lapdog implementing entities.
Yeah, I see.
Right? A lot of people will say
I
that.
would say it's probably fair to say this is, we've seen, I guess, in the COVID tyranny years, we've seen some level of pushback in terms of things like, and I guess I would frame this like, we're sort of seeing this like the nationalists are sort of fighting back against some of the globalist interests in some ways, right? So we're seeing certain countries, as an example, in the US, people like Trump who are sort of saying, oh, we've had enough of the World Health Organization, as an example. And so I wonder, do you think there could be a potential for this kind of thing, let's say nationalist or other interests who want to push back against organizations like the FATF, and maybe we're just earlier on the curve here, and if more people were to sort of understand the threat, they would kind of put FATF in the same bucket as some of these organizations like World Health Organization or others?
I think I'm going to take a kind of roundabout answer to your question. I think to my earlier point about us becoming lazy and becoming kind of delegating our responsibilities to other governments, to government entities or to banks or to police or to whoever, we're also delegating our ability to be self-sovereign to kind of superhero politicians. Whether that's Kamala for you, or whether that's Trump, or whether that's even Elon Musk, right? We're kind of idolizing these individuals, and that's just doing the same thing. It's taking away our self-sovereignty, and you're just delegating it to Elon Musk or Trump instead of taking responsibility and taking action in your own lives. It's the same thing. Now, to your question, whether this nationalistic influence can actually make a difference, my goodness, Stephan, I hope so, but I doubt it. I completely doubt it. When you look at the FATF, right, even a country like the US, a country like the US that was instrumental in its creation in 1989. I mean, it's the reason, the US is the reason the FATF exists. It's grown too big. And not just its size, but the level of brainwashing that civil servants and compliance officers and businesses and industry have had to go through over the years, the whipping they've had to take, has completely made them compliant. They want to be compliant. I go around, I listen to people talk, businesses talk. The first thing they say is, oh, we want to be compliant. Oh, we're one of the best, most compliant organizations out there. We're very compliant. We're fully regulated. That mentality, the mentality that you just have to bend over and comply, has taken hold of governments, certainly my government, I can tell you straight up. It's taken hold in businesses. It's taken a hold in individuals. And that is kind of the virus that has to be removed. Now, whether Trump or Musk can wake people up and get them to take about accountability for themselves, I really don't think so, because people are just delegating to Trump, delegating to Musk.
And I'm with you on the kind of aspect of not just kind of, nobody's coming to save you, right? It's not about like, we gotta get it's, to me, it's more like, are there people who are less bad on a particular issue? That's kind of really what it is. Now, of course, there's Bitcoin, and we want to see more software development and more, etc. advancement on that pathway. We're going to get to that also. But I think put it this way. It's fair to say, as an example, I'm sure you've seen Zuckerberg from Meta or Facebook has kind of come out saying, oh, okay, yeah, what we did was wrong. We're going to undo some of the DEI, some of the ESG garbage. Now, of course, Zuckerberg is a political actor. It's not like he genuinely believes this. If he had some balls, he would have said this in 2020, not just recently. But nevertheless, we've seen some companies walk back some of their quote unquote woke policies. We've seen some companies walk back this kind of ESG DEI. So I wonder, is there an element of, if we could create some cultural change on that front, that they could be sort of pushed into, winding back some of this FATF influence? Of course, that's a bit of a long shot for now, but I'm sure, look, if we had spoken in 2016 and we were saying, hey, this DEI woke stuff is getting too powerful, you would have been laughed out of the room, right? Like you would have had no chance, right? In the quote unquote respectable corporate or banking circles, nobody would have believed you. And yet cultural change did happen over the, let's say, 7 or 8 years since then, right?
I see your point. And look, I don't have all the answers, right? I certainly have a pathway to fixing the FATF that I'm kind of working on. But looking at your point, just what you said about Zuckerberg, are people not allowed to change? Now, I don't know what pushed him to do free and open source LLMs or AI models. Why is he suddenly changing on DEI? I don't know. And that's the thing. But we have to consider that people are allowed to change. And it's only by allowing them to change that change is going to happen. If we push back and point the finger at 2020 during COVID and say, Zuckerberg, you're always going to be a dickhead in my mind, well, what kind of incentive are we giving him to change?
Look, let me put it this way. I would say I want to see some genuine, he needs to really genuinely start pushing for actual freedom of speech and actual private property respecting aspects before he sort of believed, is how I would say it. Yeah, okay, like there's some of these small things that he's done to slowly unwind. To me, this is like he's just kissing the ring, right? He's kissing Trump's ring and he's saying, okay, I'm going to fall in line with the new regime, with the new administration. It's not necessarily saying he's like a principled libertarian, free speech, anti, etc. Right? So that's all I would say there. I think it's
I wouldn't know, Stephan. I wouldn't know. And the thing is, it's better to have 70% than 0%.
Oh, right? No question there. No question. But
so
anyway, look, I think the point is, I think cultural change and social change, like put it this way, it should be uncool to be really gung-ho about increasing FATF mandates and compliance and requirements and standards, and it should be seen as like, you're a loser, We need to make that cultural shift over time, right?
You're a better male or female if you want to be compliant. That's the message that has to come out there. You're not standing up for yourself. You're not willing to take accountability for your own actions, and you're not willing to take positive steps. You'd rather bend over and comply. That's what you are if you want to be compliant. That's what compliance means. You are a better individual, bending over, giving away your self-sovereignty, and just taking the easy path and letting someone else decide your own life. I think that's the message that society has to adopt. I don't know how society gets there. It's just my personal opinion. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, right. So look, let's put that to the side then. So that's kind of the cultural, let's say, social angle of it. And look, I think that matters. But maybe, is there another angle? Is there a legal angle? Is there a political angle that can be taken to sort of push back against the FATF and, this kind of increasing stranglehold they have on all of us from an AML and sanctions and, BSA perspective?
Well, look, Simon, from your prior podcast, He tried to fight the travel rule in the EU. Right? Like I don't know if he actually went to court with it, but he was starting some kind of action. Now, I haven't heard whether that was successful or not, but the travel rule in the EU commenced, this year. Or was it last year? December 30th, 2024, I think was the date when it commenced. So I'm assuming he was unsuccessful, right? So when I said we were kind of betrayed by our judicial and legal system earlier, that's what I mean. Is that this culture of compliance has infected all aspects and layers of our society. And so, is there a legal path to changing the FATF? Well, first of all, you have to be one of the very few countries that actually has any kind of direct say in the FATF, right? So you have to be one of the top 10 jurisdictions that I was talking about. Those are the only actors that can actually affect any kind of change. So that's the first barrier. If you're, I don't know, Uzbekistan, there's nothing you can do.
You've got no chance, yeah.
You've got no chance. So I don't think that the legal route or changing the FATF from within is the answer. Personally, I look at Bitcoin and what Bitcoin did and how it did it as some kind of inspiration for this particular instance. So instead of changing the financial system from within, instead of going inside of banks and funds and the SWIFT system and changing everything from within, it just created an alternative system that was better and more efficient and that people were attracted to because it gave them what they were seeking, what they wanted, right? Freedom, the ability to transact, to hold money, something that can't be inflated away. That's what Bitcoin did. Let's apply that to the FATF. The FATF has standards and requirements that are strangling society in more ways than none. And so the best way to change it, in my opinion, is just to create something different, something that tackles the question of criminality, that allows for criminals to be caught within due process. So look at it this way. If I had a magic wand and I were to just wave it tomorrow, what would my ideal FATF standard body be? Well, first of all, the standards would have to be set by every single member jurisdiction. Even more than that, I think that the standards, those are the requirements that countries have to implement. Those standards should be open to input from anybody who's impacted by the standards. That means you, that means me. We should have the ability to just stand up and say, hey, this thing that you're doing here, I don't like it. I don't think it's right. Let's look at something different. We can't do that now. So that's what the FATF needs to do. We need to create a new system where, put it on GitHub. Put the FATF standards on GitHub. Let people opine on what they think the standards should be. That's the first step. And only by doing that will you actually begin to corrode this kind of gargantuan entity that's strangling all of us. So decentralizing the standard setting process is the first step. I got other steps if you want to hear them.
This show brought to you by mempool.space, the world's leading Bitcoin visualizer. And now they've got an accelerator program. So if you have a transaction that you sent at a fee that was too low to get confirmed, now you can fix this with the mempool accelerator. The way it works, you can go and search your transaction, scroll down, click accelerator, and you don't need an account. You can pay with Lightning, and then it'll show you it's now in the process of being accelerated, and then after a few minutes, it's confirmed. And so this is a great way to help you out if you are stuck. And this can happen where maybe your wallet doesn't have RBF or CPFP, or it might help you in situations where it's impractical to go and re-sign. So for example, multi-sig with keys in different locations. And thirdly, even in some Lightning scenarios, perhaps a forced close, you might not be able to use RBF. And so in this case, the mempool accelerator can help you out. So keep it in mind, and you can find out more over at mempool.space/accelerator. Right, and so here's the thing. They're not willingly going to reduce their own power. They need to sort of be forced into that, right? So as an example, this step that you say, FATF should put their standards on an open source thing so that we can see it in GitHub. Why would they reduce their own power though? And obviously, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, we should abolish them. But I just don't know that that pathway is realistically going to happen, of their own volition. It's more like they would need to be forced into that.
Well, and the only way to force them, just like Bitcoin, is to create that system to have a country that has nothing to lose. I know you had Maya on from Suriname recently. Right? That was a great episode. Thanks for hosting her. You look at a country like Suriname. Suriname is compliant or largely compliant with 14 of the 40 recommendations. They're at rock bottom. They are not compliant with the FATF standards, right? You have a country like that and you have a presidential candidate like Maya, and you say, look, we have this alternative system. Yes, there's going to be some requirements. Yes, it will allow for some requirements from, financial institutions, but it's going to do so following due process, and it's going to do so in a manner that's open for input from all of your citizens. Now, if a country like that were to adopt that kind of a system, and a system that also requires the standards to have a measurable impact. So what's the point of putting a standard if there's none of that criminal activity in your jurisdiction? There's no point. But currently, the FATF forces every single country to implement all the standards, regardless of the activities taking place in their country or not. That's stupid. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. So if a country were to target actively observable criminal activity in the country, something that has a measurable, tangible impact, and then create some kind of requirement, maybe based off of the FATF or not. And they were able to say, look, every 4 years, we're going to measure the effectiveness of this requirement. And we're going to say, has it actually caught criminals? Has it prevented crime? Yes or no? We're not even asking that right now, the FATF. The standards that are being put in place, they're not measured in any way whatsoever. So measure it. Is it, and if it's not, if there's no observable impact to the requirement, remove it. If you had a country like Suriname, for example, perhaps, implement a system like that, a system that allows companies to feel secure and to think, yeah, I can operate here, I can trust other parties because there's some basic kind of disclosure, contract law. There's a respect for the rule of law here that we like, because you need that for any kind of financial industry. So, and a country like that were to implement it, they would be shunned by the world. They would lose all their correspondent banking relationships. Now, Maya said she has one. So they would lose their only correspondent banking relationship. They would be completely hammered in mainstream media. Oh, Suriname is a den for money laundering, what the changes that they're making. They would be absolutely thrown to the curb, right? But if the system is done properly and businesses are attracted to it because the country's doing what businesses want, and the country's actually catching criminals because it's forced to measure the impact of the requirements that it's implementing. If that country's successful and it's done in a proper way, other countries will take notice. And you need that first kind of
the first mover, pig. Yeah. Kind of like the El Salvador or the...
Right. That guinea pig is going to be completely slaughtered, right? And so that guinea pig has to have a tough skin. But that's how you change the FATF, is you create an alternative system. You have one country, one guinea pig implemented. And it's a guinea pig that can grow into a bull, right? This has potential to change financial markets over the long run for the better, and to give us the kind of world that I personally want to see my children inherit. So would I be interested? Would I go working for any kind of agency in Suriname if they were to do something like that? Yes. And I would do so for half my pay that I'm getting right now, because I believe in the cause. And I'm not alone. There are people who want to see change. They just don't see an outlet for it. They don't see an avenue for it. So let Suriname or any other country implement an alternative FATF standard system, and let's see what happens.
Well, yeah, I'm all for that. I think it's great more competition against FATF would be great. Now, I suspect, I have an idea what you're probably going to answer, but just for the argument's sake, if somebody listening is like, just, do Bitcoin peer-to-peer, don't even touch the fiat system, do you have an answer to that? Or is your answer, let me put it that way, yeah. Do you have an answer to that idea that, let's say cypherpunk listener might be listening and thinking, well, why even bother saying
why
an
Bitcoin?
alternative?
Use Monero, right? Like, go all in. If you're going to go all in, use Monero, sure. Right? Somebody like that just says, I'm just gonna escape and bypass the system. Good for you. And you need more people like that. I say, go for it. Do whatever you think will achieve the world you want to see, right? I think individuals should be empowered to do what they believe will affect change in the world. I'm doing that right now. Let them do it their own way. I have nothing against that. And I don't have any retort. I don't want to destroy their hopes and dreams. I don't want them to stop building parallel economies using Bitcoin or Monero or XRP or whatever other token. I have nothing against those people because they're trying to change the world with a foundation of values that I support, that I share. So go ahead, do it. If you're successful, and my method is unsuccessful, I'll join yours gladly. I'll support you mentally. I'll give you a pat on the back. I'll participate in it. I think I'm just one person. You're just one person. Trump is one person. Elon Musk is one person. One thing I've seen in policy development is that if I create a policy document with 3 or 4 solutions, right? That's just from one brain. One brain is weak. One brain isn't smart. 10,000 brains are smart. 1 million brains can do so much more than one brain can do. And so I think everybody should just act according to their own conscience. And that includes the Kamala crowd, the people who think we should have DEI or whatever. Go for it. I'm all about self-sovereignty. And I think we should have the freedom to choose which system we believe we want to live in. I should have the ability to choose if I want to live in a DEI system or if I want to live in a, non-DEI system where it's merit-based. I should have that freedom to choose. The worst part of our society is we're unable to choose. We're told, we're shoved something down our throats, and we're said, this is the way it's got to be, and you're guilted and shamed into acting according to that system. That's what's wrong with society. Liberate people, liberate their ability to do what it is they want to do, and I have no problem against it. I think we should be free to act according to our own conscience.
Great. Well, yeah, I think people should, there's multiple, let's say, prongs or approaches. Like there's kind of the legal kind of attack angle. There's the create an alternative at the foundation level. There's let's say, the cypherpunk software. Let's build more ways for people to not be reliant on the fiat system. I think all of these are fruitful, and we might see more people try to build out, let's say, Bitcoin and other, let's say, alternative banking system methods, and we'll see what exactly happens. But I think one of the concerns right now, and obviously you're well aware of this, is what you've been talking about, which is that, let's say you're a Bitcoin company today and you want to set up and you want to try to help onboard people. Whether we like it or not, today, a lot of Bitcoin companies have to interface with the fiat system, which means they have to get onboarded to a fiat bank. And if they want that fiat bank to be able to, take fiat transfers from somebody else, they've got to comply with all of it. So it's sort of there's this.
If you're a company right now, I get it, because I'm actually creating the laws that those companies have to follow. I'm part of it. I'm doing it right now. I'm applying lube every single day. I go to work and I do what I'm doing. I'm applying lube, bending over. It's great. It's not great. But what I'm doing on the side is I'm fighting for a better world. And those companies think, maybe it's true, that they have to comply. It's probably true. They have to comply. They have to have that on-ramp, off-ramp in the traditional fiat and TradFi. So let them comply on one hand and let them fight with the other hand. They have to balance their kind of value-based services, the values that make them who they are. First of all, they have to define their values. What do they stand for? What do they want to achieve? And then, if they have to go one way, which is the compliance way, then they need to balance that out with, funding some open source software, from, maybe kind of pushing the limit a little bit. You have to have an outlet, because if you don't do that, if you're a value-based individual and you love freedom and you want freedom and you're bending over and complying, it's a shitty life. I've done it for 5 years now. You need to have an outlet, and you need to contribute to society to be self-actualized, to be happier with yourself, to sleep at night. Companies should do the same thing. Comply. Do everything you need to do. Have that compliance officer there. Do all the KYC you need to do. Everything you need to do to operate and thrive. And fund some projects, right? Put on a mask. Go out and talk anonymously. I don't know. Do whatever it is you think you need to do. And that's the thing about society and people like us, people with values who value freedom. We're going to find a way to improve society. So find your way as a business to improve society the way you want to see it. And comply on the other hand. It's a balancing act.
Fair enough. One other topic area, and I'm sure you'll have thoughts on this, is the whole choke point 2.0 conversation. Right now, I'm sure you're very much aware of this, but the gist of it, for people who aren't familiar, there's this concern, and I believe I believe it actually did happen, that in the US case, there were, let's say, lawmakers and regulators who were basically going and killing businesses who, they were using some of this AML and FATF and these kinds of concerns as a mechanism to either debank unfavored people or banks that they didn't like. They used it to sort of shut down banks they didn't like, or to shut down quote-unquote crypto companies who wanted a bank account. And so a lot of them got debanked, and individuals who were part of these companies got debanked also. So where does the whole OCP 2.0 play into this? And hypothetically, in a Trump administration, do you believe that some of this may lighten or be not as much of a concern?
The danger with alleviating the choke points, the danger with kind of lessening the stranglehold on a sector, is that it's going to get compliant, and that it's going to be more comfortable, and it's going to say, all right, I don't have to do as much anymore, I'm happy. Now, that's the one step forward. It's the totalitarian tiptoe, whatever it is that it's called. It's putting a huge requirement forward that says, look, we're going to strangle this sector. It's horrible. Everything's dark. Everything's negative. People are depressed. And then you alleviate it halfway, right? The net effect is you've moved halfway forward from before. Now, you look at the World Economic Forum, like 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, whatever, their top priority was rebuilding trust. Now, isn't it funny how all of a sudden you have Musk, you have Trump, who come in and say what people actually want to hear, right? Now, what does that do? It's going to make people kind of take a breath and go, the last 10 years have been so hard. Now Trump is going to come and he's going to kind of make things a little bit better, maybe a lot better. It's still going to be worse than it was before. There's no way Trump is going back to the early 2000s in terms of regulation. I don't think he'd be able to, right? So when you look at change, yes, like I said, 70% is better than 0%. Let Trump do it. Let Musk do it. Personally, do I believe that it can change the system? No. I encourage them. And yes, you're right. He's probably going to alleviate the choke point pressure. He's going to open that relief valve a little bit, maybe a lot. And that's going to be great for this sector. But this sector is going to be lulled into a sense of comfort and complacency. And I think that's the whole point. People aren't going to be pissed anymore. They're not going to take action because they're going to be comfortable. Well, I can do this requirement that Trump says now I need to do. It's the bare basics, right? No, he took away all these other things. I should be so thankful for Trump doing this for me. That's the kind of mentality that we're going to see if he does what he says he's going to do. Is it good change in the world? Yes. Am I happy for it? Yes. Will it enable companies to innovate and to do things that they weren't able to do before? Yes. So it's all good change. However, beware the sense of complacency it will bring, because you're still depending on government for your company to operate. You're still depending on a single centralized point of failure, which can go either way in, 4, 8, 12 years, right? It can swing back again, and it will. We both know that red and blue are the two wings of a same bird. So right now what's happening is the pendulum's going one way. Look at the COVID requirements, right? They've alleviated now. People aren't complaining. People are happy. They can travel. They don't need masks anymore. I need a mask, but that's for another reason. So people are really happy. But all the laws, all the requirements, all the legislation that was put in place during COVID, still there, right? So that's the totalitarian tiptoe. During COVID, they put all these draconian laws that we were all against, and they implemented them, and we hated it. And then they took the implementation away because COVID's not a big threat anymore. I don't know. But the laws remain. That's the totalitarian tiptoe. And I think that's what we're going to see from Trump and Musk and whatnot. Musk is trying to centralize social media. He's trying to centralize internet service providers with his Starlink. That's the biggest danger. I can't believe people aren't concerned about that. We have thousands of internet services providers right now around the world providing internet, allowing people to access the internet. Musk wants to centralize that. He wants to be the big one that controls all these satellites. Look, we need decentralized internet services providers. So, go for Musk if you want, but don't allow him to monopolize that service. Same thing for social media. Use Nostr. I'm not on X. I've never been on X. I'm never going on X. I disagree with delegating my kind of freedom to some kind of centralized entity. So I'm on Nostr. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm on Nostr. That's where you get a hold of me. I check it, 10, 20 times a day.
Fantastic.
Right?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, we'll make sure, the Nostra is in the show notes and that. And I agree with you that you have to be realistic when you look at some of these people that, yes, Elon might be innovating in certain ways. And I guess Starlink is, obviously, it's hard to deny the use of that innovation. But as you say, especially in the early days of that, it's kind of a monopoly and it's kind of centralized. Maybe over time, it does decentralize more. Maybe other companies, SpaceX has other competitors and Starlink has other competitors and so on. And I guess on the Nostra question, I mean, I think for me, it's more just like I try to use multiple platforms. I use Nostra as well as X, as well as other things, but it's certainly worthwhile. I guess one other question I have for you. Now, we touched on this a little bit around how much it can be built out from a software perspective and the cypherpunks and the whatever. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on whether, from a fiat perspective, how much of this is alleviated by the likes of, let's say, stable coins, stable sats, like a Blink style, or stable channels, like a Tony Klausing's approach. How much do you think, things can be mitigated on that side, like using some kind of stable coin, stable sats, stable channels, DLCs, something like that?
I think society will produce whatever solutions it needs, if allowed to. If people want Tether or Circle or whatever other kind of solution that's being promoted out there and it's being used and it thrives, then it has value to society. So I think I didn't get your question, because what's the ill that you're trying to mitigate with those stablecoins? What is it that you're...
No. So what I'm trying to say is, as an example, is it possible for people to set up, quote unquote, cypherpunk banking that never touches the fiat system, right? Because it's using stablecoin, stable sats, stable channel, some kind of means that is not reliant on FATF, right? Because like what we were saying is FATF is this kind of globalist concern that is stopping, sovereignty at the nation state level and pushing everyone into this kind of controlled AML system.
Yep.
And stablecoins and stable sats and stable channels and, cypherpunk, whatever, eCash even, is that a realistic alternative, or do you think it's just too early for that, or do you have any thoughts on whether that also represents a challenge, an alternative to the FATF-controlled system?
So thank you for the question. I appreciate it, and I understand it now, I think. I'll answer by saying that I'll go back to my earlier comment that, you should do what your values dictate. And if there's people who feel like those kind of solutions will help, please do it. And do it because your intentions are correct. Your intentions are right. They're founded on a foundation. They're based on a foundation of values that are strong and that have, freedom as a basis. Go for it. Do it. Find out if it's going to work. I don't have that answer, but I'll give you a warning. That's one thing that I can give, given my experience working for a government and doing compliance legislation, is that they are currently working on ways to come for you. If you're doing cypherpunk type solutions, wallets, you're probably very small, right? And you're off the radar, but don't let that kind of lull you into thinking that they're not going to come. The FATF has unhosted wallets strongly in its sights, and it has the power of 200 jurisdictions behind it. It's a huge cannon, and believe me, if your project gets big enough, that cannon's gonna blow your way. So don't be lulled into thinking that because you have a cypherpunk project, you're immune. Really have great OPSEC, right? Do things the right way. Don't dox yourself. Don't be kind of incentivized by fame for your name or reputation. Do things anonymously. Create 10 different names, and submit code with those 10 different names. do things properly. I'm not an OPSEC person, so I really don't know how to do it properly. What I'd like to tell those people is just a warning. Right now, it's the totalitarian tiptoe, and Trump will kind of step back a little bit, but believe me, there will come a point in time where the FATF will come for your project if it gets big enough. So be ready.
Yeah, and look, I will point out as well, stablecoins, especially, whether people use them or not, you should be aware that the large stablecoins have integrated surveillance, right? They do, let's say, cooperate or collaborate with three-letter agencies. So people should be aware of that. But I guess I was asking just for the sake of completeness, and people might be interested about, are there approaches down that pathway, something in that direction, maybe not exactly a stablecoin or something like that, that might help as an alternative. Anyway, we've covered that. Any final closing thought, or if there's one, let's say one takeaway for people, what's the final takeaway that you want people to come away from this with it?
Society's been infected by a virus of compliance, and this virus has affected our testosterone levels as a society. We've become beta individuals, like I've said many times here, and that's a virus that we have to shed. We need to get a strong dose of vitamin C, vitamin D, and that vitamin C and vitamin D is taking responsibility for the world around you. You can't change the entire world right away, but you can certainly educate and change the world around you. Your direct, immediate circle of people who you associate with, where you spend your money, where you spend your time. Are you addicted to X? Are you scrolling X whenever you have 5 minutes free? You might be addicted to X. Take accountability for yourself and stop donating and giving your personal freedom and accountability to individuals, governments, compliance organizations. Just live according to your own values. You're going to be so much better for doing so.
Well, listeners, I will link OpnState's Nostra pub key in the show notes. And OpnState, thank you for sharing. I think it's been a really valuable, a lot of valuable insights that you've shared for listeners. So thanks for joining me today.